Hey there guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to make a panoramic camera mount to avoid parallaxing. If you don't know what that is, you can Google it and then you can make great panoramic pictures like this one. As you can see, my cousin's in here twice, right there, and that's Jelly Bean right there. So quick overview of this guy. It's made out of wood. I got a couple of washers separating the arm from the stand just to give it a little bit of smoothness when it moves. Also, I have some washers separating the camera from the arm itself, and that's to allow for some space for my lens to zoom here on the end. I noticed that the zoom ring was, or the focus ring was catching on the arm, so I decided to put a little space in between there. Right here I have a wing nut on the side that I use to adjust the camera tilt up and down. On the back, to actually hold the camera on the arm, I have a 1/4 inch like paddle bolt. And that's so I can easily unscrew and screw the camera on. If you notice here, whenever I swivel the mount while it's pointed straight up, it swivels right in the center of the lens, and that's what you want. And I'll show you how to measure that out here in a little bit. Let's take a look at what we need for this build. First of all, we have an assortment of screws and washers. Next off, we have a strong oak board, something strong. We have a Lazy Susan here. This is optional. We also have some matting that goes in the bottom of a silverware drawer, something like that. We also have a couple cans of black spray paint, some high bond adhesive like rubber cement, and some good old trusty sandpaper. I started out with the base. What I did here is I actually took the Lazy Susan and placed it on the piece of board and measured out the amount that I needed for each side, and I cut that out with a table saw. Next thing I did was I found the center of those pieces of wood by drawing an X to the corners. Next thing I did is I drilled some holes that will actually hold the Lazy Susan in place on these pieces of board. So what I used inside these holes that I just made are these little nut inserts, and what they do is they have these little claws on them, and you can drill or screw rather into them with a bolt, and it will hold the Lazy Susan in place. They actually work very well. Never used these in the past, so all you had to do is just hammer them into these holes. I found out that I need to make these holes actually a little bit bigger for those to fit, so that's what I just did there. So I'm just hammering them in. I put it on the ground so the concrete would be a nice sturdy place for me to hammer those in there. The nice thing about this Lazy Susan is that the holes in each side are offset, so whenever it swivels around, the heads of the screws don't bump into each other, so that's kind of a good thing. So what I'm doing here is just drilling that sucker in and anchoring it down to the board there, and then it makes a pretty nice secure little connection. Now, one thing you want to do before you put both pieces together is actually drill a hole in the very center of the bottom plate, and you got to find the center again by marking an X from the corners of that square. Now you want to drill a 1/4 inch hole in the middle, because that is what the standard tripod mount is for your camera. I used the same thing I used here that I did for the corners right there. Before I hammered in this insert nut, I actually took a little bit of the high bond adhesive and put it around that a little bit, spilled a little bit there, as you can see, hammered it in for a really good secure fit. Now that I have the tripod mount inserted into the bottom part of this swivel head, I can actually go ahead and finish screwing this all on. Here's my little setup I use to find the nodal point of my camera lens. I actually just sat my camera lens on top of my unfinished panoramic tripod head and swiveled it around until the nuts lined up when I was panned to the left or the right. And here is a picture of that measurement there. You want to measure from the camera mount to the nodal point. What I did here is I actually marked that measurement out on a piece of the board, and I kind of just eyeballed it to put it in the center of what will become the arm that my camera actually sits on. What I did here is I just kind of drew some cross lines in between those two marks, and that is going to be the center of the arm. If you can remember from the beginning, this arm right here, one half of it is going to actually attach to the base, or to the base stand, and I can't have a nut just sticking out above that hole because it has to be flush with that arm. So what I want to do is drill a hole big enough to where this washer and the head of this bolt will be flush with the rest of the arm. So I took a 1.5 inch paddle drill bit and marked it about the depth that it needs in order to make a flush hole with this board. And so I'm just drilling that out here, and once that tape actually hits the board and gets to the depth it needs, it'll start spraying the sawdust out like that, and that's how you know when you have the right depth. Once I get the depth that I need for that 1.5 inch hole, I'll take I think it's a 3/8 inch drill bit and drill a hole. Now be careful when you're using a drill press, because if you don't hold it hard enough, that thing will get away from you, as you just saw it do there. So drill a nice hole in there and make sure you got a good hold of it. Next thing I'm doing here is going to insert my washer inside of there, and that's actually going to make it to where the bolt doesn't eat through the wood whenever you tighten it up really tight. And there it is. As you see, I still needed to take out a little bit more of the hole, so I went ahead and did that as well, so now it's flush. So what I'm going to do with the drawer lining is actually spread some of this adhesive on there as well, and I'm going to glue a layer of it to this arm. Did that for a couple of reasons. You want a little bit of padding between that and where the camera sits on the arm. You also don't want your lens to hit the wood, just in case. So a good bit of padding there is always a good idea. It's always a good idea also to let the stuff dry before you start cutting it. I actually ended up putting a second layer on there because I kind of screwed it up because I cut it too fast before it dried. Also, it actually made for a little bit better padding. Once I let the rest of it dry, I actually cut out the hole right there, as you can see me doing for the part that holds the arm onto the base stand of the head itself. So as you can see here on the base of the entire head, these little bolts, they actually stick up through the bottom. Now you could grind those off, or you could cut them off before you put them in, but I decided not to do that because I can easily get around it. What I did was cut a recessed part in the base with my table saw here, and I just basically made the saw the height of those bolts that stuck up, and just cut out the excess of it right here. That way those will just go over them. One thing I want to tell you here while I have a moment is that this is a fairly heavy apparatus here. So if you don't have a very sturdy tripod, it is going to wiggle around a little bit, and you might not get very good pictures. One thing that I recommend is going on eBay and checking out surveying tripods. They're inexpensive and they're very sturdy. You don't have to pay like $1,000 for a very sturdy tripod. Now, one thing that's pretty important to do is in the base itself, also you want to cut the corners off of it. And the reason why is because if you don't, you will never be able to tighten the screw that actually goes in the bottom of the camera. You have to tilt it up in order for it to make clearance. So now I'll just drill the hole kind of in a random spot, random height up the board. The height isn't really that important because all you want is your camera to have enough clearance in order for it to swivel back and forth underneath it. So again, I recessed this washer in the wood just for kicks. Now I actually had to take the bottom part apart again. I had to take the Lazy Susan off in order to attach the stand to the base, so that's what I'm doing now. Now here's where the calculations come in. In order to make it swivel in the center like this, what you have to do is you have to measure the distance between the center of the lens and the front of the stand there, and you don't want to forget to take into account that you have these washers here and here, because that's added distance. So once you find the center of this plate right here, what you want to do is take this distance from the center of that plate and line it up with the inside of this wall right here. If you do that correctly, that should put the center of the camera lens in the center of the base. That way it'll swivel right in the center. Now once you have the center of the base marked, what you want to do is you want to mark where the inside of that plate is going to be with this distance right here. So this plate right here is what we're trying to line up. Once you get that distance marked from the center, I used 3 1/4 inch board. So my goal is to make sure that I have that board exactly the length that I need it from the center. Once I find that, I just drill some pilot holes. That was my cousin right there. He didn't know we were filming. Drilled some pilot holes and put some of the high bond adhesive on there. Just kind of stick it on there, line up the I put the screws in the base there to line up the holes. Once you get them lined up, give her a good crank down and that part is done. Now that those pieces are joined back together, you can bolt that Lazy Susan back on there, and most of it's pretty much assembled after this. Once I got it all screwed back in together, I just gave it a good sand down, made sure to get all the rough edges off, just because, hey, if I spend all this time on this thing, I want it to look good, you know, or at least look halfway good. So got it all painted up and put it together here and got my camera mounted onto it, and here's what it looks like all finished, as you saw at the beginning of the video. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is I took a piece of that drawer liner and I glued one of these 1.5 inch washers to it, and the reason I did that is because this is the one that I want to be up against the camera. That way the camera's not just touching metal, just in case anything weird ever happens. I'm kind of OCD like that, I guess, but hey, it's a good idea. Also, it kind of holds it in place a little bit, I believe. So there you have it, guys. Here is some final shots of it here, just in case you want to see it a little bit better. Thanks for watching, and happy building.